غرباء 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 غرباء.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن نبينا وسيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه وخليله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد. As I'm sure most of you are aware, our brother Sheikh Abu Osama is away on Hajj, and so I've been asked to cover his Sunday lectures. And since I was going to start my own series after Eid, inshaAllah, which I used to do on a Thursday, and inshaAllah it will continue on a Thursday after Eid, which will be on fiqh. And inshaAllah we're going to go through the book Bulugh al-Maram of Imam Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, the famous book of hadith that pertains mainly to fiqh and the rulings that a person needs to know in their ibadat and in their daily lives. So since we were going to go through that anyway after Eid, I thought what would be a nice introduction to that and to that series of lectures would be to go through another book of another great scholar of Islam, but this time pertaining to the etiquettes and mannerisms and the way that a student of knowledge should conduct themselves. One of the things that I've noticed is that we go to many lectures, we attend many conferences, we sit with many scholars, but I think very few of us really know the true etiquettes of a student of knowledge. And it brings to my mind that famous statement of the mother of Imam Malik, rahimahullah, who when Imam Malik was a young boy, she took him by his hand and she took him to one of his first sheikhs, one of his first teachers, a man by the name of Rabi'atul Ra'i, rahimahullah. And she took him to him and she said to him, to her son, go to Rabi'a فَخُذْ مِنْ أَدَبِهِ قَبْلَ عِلْمِهِ, and take from his etiquettes before you take from his knowledge. And look at this woman, and she wasn't a scholar of Islam. His mother wasn't anyone famous. She wasn't someone who'd studied with scholars, but she knew the basics. This was something which was known to the Muslims of that time. When you go to someone, to a scholar, to a teacher, to a sheikh, take from his etiquettes and his mannerisms before you take from his knowledge. And that's why it's reported that Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, it is said that he would have over 5,000 students in his lectures. Over 5,000 people in Baghdad. Out of them, only 500 would write. And the remaining 4,500 would just simply watch him, his manners, his etiquettes, his mannerisms, the way that he conducted himself. And so people would go to these scholars. Yes, they would listen to the knowledge, they would benefit, but they weren't serious students in the sense that they were writing everything that he said down, memorizing what he said, coming back the next week to learn what was going on next. Simply they would sit with him just to look at the way that he was, the way that he conducted himself, the mannerisms and the etiquettes that he possessed, rahimahullahu ta'ala. And this is why even with our own children, anyone that's a father, anyone that's a mother, anyone that's an uncle, an auntie, you know that when you have a little child in the house, one of the first things that we teach our children is etiquette and mannerisms. Just as we teach them to say La ilaha illallah and Assalamu alaikum, and these words, Ammi, Abbu, all of these words, we teach them mannerisms. We teach them etiquettes. Eat with your right hand. Go to the toilet with your left foot first. When a guest comes, go and give them salam. It's a part of our lives, our manners and our etiquettes. And there is nothing more important that we should have these etiquettes with than the knowledge that Allah Azza wa Jal has revealed. With the way that we interact and deal with the book of Allah, the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the inheritors of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who are the scholars, and the inheritance that he left, which is knowledge. So when we come to this, when we come to any lecture, when we come to anything, one of the things that we do is we possess those etiquettes. And one of the etiquettes that I'm going to ask you now to perform and to actually enact is that you come closer. Because this is one of the first lessons that you learn. That the students of knowledge sit close to the knowledge and they don't sit far away. And there is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when a group of companions came and some of them came close, others sat in the middle and others sat far away. And the Prophet ﷺ commented on each one. And as for the one who sits far away, it's as if he doesn't want to take knowledge. He's come with a certain semblance of arrogance. Even though he's come to learn about the religion, he has some arrogance in him that he sits far away as if he's here doing someone else a favor. And so this was one of the first things that we learned. And I remember one of the first lectures that I went to in Saudi Arabia, in the Haram, in the mosque of our Prophet ﷺ, was a lecture by the great scholar and Sheikh Abu Bakr al-Jazairi, Hafidhahullah, one of the oldest scholars of Medina. A man who can't even walk, he has to be wheeled in a wheelchair. But every single day without fail, this man doesn't take a holiday, except maybe on Eid. Every single day he comes to the Haram between Maghrib and Isha and he does a lecture there. And I remember that one of the things that amazed me was that people would literally be sitting by his feet. He would be sitting on a chair, and it was a raised chair because the Sheikh's short. And the people would literally be sitting by his feet. He couldn't even see them if he looked down. Because of the way that the chair was positioned, he was seated back. He couldn't even see them. But yet they would come and they would sit by his feet in that way, because this is from the etiquettes of knowledge. And so it's something which we need to learn, something which we need to possess. And the etiquettes of knowledge isn't simply about the way that you come and sit in the circle of knowledge. It's not simply about the way that you come and you deal with a sheikh or with a teacher. But it's more than this. It's the way that you encapsulate what knowledge is, and the way that you should hold yourself and conduct yourself once you gain this knowledge. And there isn't a single person here except that they are a student of knowledge in some way, shape or form, whether minor or major, to whatever degree or level. Every single person is a student of knowledge. But if all we've gained from our knowledge is simply what we hear others say, and simply maybe how to pray correctly or not to pray correctly, even though that is something which is good, then we haven't really gained one of the true benefits of knowledge. And that is the way that we conduct ourselves, the way, the etiquettes that we have. And that's why when you go to certain scholars, you just simply look at them and you see an aura. There's something radiating from them, an aura on their faces, on their bodies, the way that they are, before you even hear a single word. You just simply go there and you see this from them because of what Allah Azza wa Jal has given them from etiquettes and from the benefits of knowledge. And that's why it was once said to Imam Ahmad rahimahullah that so-and-so, and the man was speaking about another person, so-and-so isn't a person of knowledge. And Imam Ahmad said, no, he's not a person of knowledge, but he's already gained the fruits of knowledge. And that is taqwa, fear of Allah Azza wa Jal, and holding and conducting yourself in an exemplary way and fashion. And I remember one of our sheikhs, he said, Hafidhahullah, that once the first time that he ever met Sheikh bin Baz, rahimahullah, he went and he sat with him. And he sat in his house, and the Sheikh was invited to go and have lunch with Sheikh bin Baz. And he said, I didn't eat a single thing. I didn't eat a single thing. I didn't drink a single thing. All I did was look at the Sheikh and cry. That's all I did. For the whole lunch, all I did was sit there and shed tears and cry. Simply because I was so overjoyed by seeing the Sheikh. And the person next to me, he said, eat. So I said to him, I can eat and drink whenever I want, but I don't know if I'll be able to see him again. Leave me alone. I don't need to eat and drink. I've come here to meet him and to see the way he is. And so these are the benefits that we have when we sit with our scholars, when we see from them what we see from them. This is one of the benefits that we gain. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was to go through this book in a very basic way. And that is the book of our Shaykh Bakr Abu Zayd rahimahullah, Hillatu Talib al-Ilm, or the etiquettes and manners of a student of knowledge. And I'm not going to go through the book in a detailed fashion. I'm not going to read the book, and I'm not going to go through the explanation of the book or anything like that. But what I've done is I've taken the headings of the book. So I've taken basically the chapter headings that the Shaykh has put in his book, and then I'm going to explain it in a very simple, inshallah, brief way. And a lot of this explanation is taken from Shaykh Ibn Attained rahimahullah, his explanation of this book. And what I really wanted to do was bring practical examples from the lives of people like Shaykh bin Baz, Shaykh Ibn Attained and others, from what I've heard or from what I've read from other people as well. And one of the points that I want to mention here is that Shaykh Ibn Attained rahimahullah was much older than the author of this book. Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd is probably 20, 30 years younger than Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen. Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen was much older. He was much more senior. He was much more famous and more well known, not only in Saudi Arabia but outside as well. Probably there are some from amongst you who haven't even heard of Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd. But Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen, and look at the humbleness, the piety, the knowledge of a person, the etiquettes and mannerisms of a person of knowledge. When he came to teach his students the etiquettes of a student of knowledge, he chose this book. And the Shaykh would have said that I can use the books of the Salaf, and there are books of the Salaf. Many scholars have written on this chapter. Many scholars have written about this subject. He could have just said, I'll make my own stuff up. The Shaykh was knowledgeable enough to just give a lecture without having to refer to a book. But he wanted to teach his students through his actions. And sometimes your actions, many a time your actions speak louder than your words. And so the Shaykh chose a book of someone who was probably 20, 30 years his junior, someone who's less senior than him, someone who's less well known than him. And he chose this book and he explained it. He chose this, and it's a beautiful book. I'm not taking anything away from the book or from the author. But the point is to know the humility that the scholars have. And this is again from the Etiquettes of knowledge. So this book has a number of sections, but before we go into it, I just wanted to give you a brief biography of the author, who is Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd rahimahullah, who was born in the year 1364 Hijri, which approximately is 1945. And he grew up in Saudi Arabia near Riyadh, and he studied under many of the great scholars of that time, such as Sheikh bin Baz and others. And one of his main teachers was a man by the name of Sheikh Muhammad al-Amin al-Shanqiti rahimahullah, who was from the scholars of Riyadh and Saudi Arabia, who passed away some time ago. This was a scholar who originally came from Mauritania. He wasn't a Saudi, he wasn't someone that lived in Saudi Arabia. He came and he migrated from Mauritania. But he was a man of knowledge, a great scholar of Islam. And when the people or the scholars of Saudi Arabia saw him, they made him into a teacher. And then he went and he taught at the Islamic University of Medina, and he lived in Medina, and he wrote a book of tafsir, which is one of the most beautiful books of tafsir around. And then he passed away in Medina as well, rahimahullah. One of his main students was the author of this book, Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd. Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd also lived for a period of time in Medina. He was a judge of Medina. And not only that, he was an imam of the haram, of the Prophet's mosque sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was an imam for a very short period, just 2 or 3 years, but he was an imam of the mosque as well. And then he was added to the Majma' al-Fiqh al-Islami, which is the World Fiqh Council. And not only was he added, but he was made the president of that council. And this is a testament to the knowledge that he possessed, rahimahullah. And he was also a member of the Hayat Kibar al-Ulama, the senior scholars of Saudi Arabia. And he continued in both of those positions until he passed away in the year 1429, around about 2008, rahimahullah ta'ala. And the Shaykh, one of the amazing things that I read from his biography, was one of the people that he was most influenced by was Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah. He loved Ibn al-Qayyim, he loved his works, he loved the way that he wrote and the way that he structured his sentences and his paragraphs, the way how logically he used to bring his proofs and so on. And he was amazed by this personality. And that's why I've heard a number of people say that they don't think there's anyone more knowledgeable about the writings of Ibn al-Qayyim than Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd. He spent a lot of his time going through his works and benefiting from him. And you can see in his own writings, when he writes, he can see that there is some trace of Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah as well. The Shaykh, he basically categorizes his books, he splits it into a number of sections. And so inshallah we're going to go through, as I said, the headings of those sections and then add to that as well. I'm not going to go through every single chapter heading. So there's some chapter headings which I will miss out as well, as you probably know if you have the book. And the reason that I've done this is because everyone has the book. The book is in English. It's been translated in English. So you can buy the book, you can read the book. So I didn't see much benefit in just simply reading the book to you once again. But inshallah I wanted to add something slightly different to it. The first thing that the Shaykh speaks about, rahimahullah, is آداب الطالب في نفسه. The etiquettes that the student of knowledge should possess within themselves. The etiquettes that me and you as a student of knowledge should possess within ourselves. So before you worry about your shaykh, before you worry about your friends, before you worry about the knowledge that you're actually going to seek, what are the etiquettes that you need to have? What should be seen through you before you even become a student of knowledge. And the first thing that he mentions, rahimahullah, he says, al-ilmu ibadah. This is the first thing, that you know that knowledge is an act of worship. Knowledge is an act of worship. And it is said, and he mentions that it is said from amongst the scholars that they said that seeking knowledge is a secret type of prayer. It is a secret type of prayer. And it is an act of worship that is done with the heart. And so that's why you have many hadith of our Prophet ﷺ as well that speaks about the superiority of the scholar over the worshipper, the one who prays during the day, the night, and fasts during the day. And the superiority is like the moon over the stars. And so this is basically what the Shaykh is speaking about here. That the first thing that when we come to seek knowledge, whether you just go simply to a lecture, or you're listening to something on the internet, or you're reading a book, or you're attending a conference, or whatever you're doing, the first thing that you know is that you're in an act of worship. Simply by sitting here and listening, you're in an act of worship. By learning something new, by reading a book, by learning about the Quran, about the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, you are in an act of worship. And that's why it's reported that Imam Ahmad rahimahullah said that there is nothing that you can compare to knowledge so long as your intention is correct. So if your intention is correct, there is nothing after the obligatory acts of Islam, there is nothing that is comparable, equal to seeking knowledge. So he was asked, "O Imam Ahmad, how does a person correct their intention? What's the correct intention to have when you seek knowledge?" And he replied, rahimahullah, that you intend to lift ignorance over yourself and those around you. That you intend to lift ignorance off of yourself and then those that are around you. And that's why the Shaykh mentions in his book that because it's an act of worship, then likewise with every act of worship you need to have two things, two conditions. Number one is sincerity, and number two, that you follow the way of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's reported by Imam al-Thawri rahimahullah, the great scholar of Islam. He would say about himself that I was given understanding and knowledge of the Quran. But when I began to accept the gifts of the rulers, the money that they gave to me, the gifts and presents that they would give to me, it was taken away from me. The understanding of the Quran was raised from me. And Imam al-Thawri rahimahullah was a great scholar of Islam. But the scholars of the past were very humble. And they were quick to hold themselves to account and quick to lower themselves in the eyes of the people. And so Imam al-Thawri has many such statements when he speaks about intention and sincerity. And it's famously reported on him that he said, rahimahullah, I haven't fought with anything more difficult than correcting my own intention. And so here he's basically saying that since when my intention was correct, when there was no outside influences, I was seeking it only for Allah's sake, then Allah gave me understanding of the religion. And then when other things started to come into me, I accepted the gifts that the rulers would give me because I was a scholar, with the praise that other people gave towards me because they considered me to be a scholar. Allah raised this from me. Meaning when that intention was no longer there, and Imam al-Thawri was a great scholar, he's saying this in a way of humbling himself, but he's saying that it was lifted from him. And there is a lesson in this, that when we don't make something sincere for the sake of Allah, and this isn't only in knowledge but in everything, then Allah Azza wa Jal won't give it to us. He won't give us something that is so precious as knowledge when our intention is for other than the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why seeking knowledge not only is a great act of worship, but it is also dangerous. It is dangerous in the sense that shaitan easily comes to the student of knowledge and he whispers to them. And he influences them in evil ways. How many times when a person learns something, or they think they know more than everyone else, shaitan comes to them and he makes them appear arrogant. He makes them appear to have pride within them. And then that person, instead of benefiting and helping others, he has the opposite action. He has the opposite influence over people. And that's why it is said that knowledge is attained in 3 stages. There are 3 stages to knowledge. The first is that a person knows and he learns and he seeks knowledge, and because of it he becomes arrogant. And this is something which everyone goes through. except those that Allah has mercy upon. We seek knowledge and we think we know more than everyone else. We seek knowledge and we think that we're better than everyone else. We seek knowledge and we think that we're Shaykhul Islam. There is no one on the earth more knowledgeable than me today. This is the first stage. And the difficult part and the challenge here and the trap of shaitan is when a person thinks that they've now done enough and they stop seeking knowledge. Because if they were to continue, they would move on to the second stage. But the trap of shaitan is in that stage of arrogance, you stop. You think you've done enough. You know enough. There's no one else that needs to know. There's no one else that knows more than you. There's no one else that can help you, benefit you in any way. You think it's enough. And so you stop. And when you stop, that is the trap of shaitan. You seek knowledge, but shaitan comes and he traps you. Because if you were to carry on, you would go to the second stage. And that is what the scholars call tawadu', humility, humbleness. Knowing that in reality, this knowledge, you realize that the more that you learn, the more there is to learn. And that's why it's famously reported from amongst the Salaf that they would say that a person will continue to be a scholar so long as they continue to seek knowledge. And it is only once they think that they are a scholar and they stop seeking knowledge that they will become ignorant. It's a beautiful statement. A scholar continues to be a scholar so long as they seek knowledge, but once they stop seeking knowledge thinking that they have become a scholar, now they have become ignorant. So this is something which we need to benefit from. The humbleness and the humility that the scholars possessed. And inshallah, as we go through this, we'll mention this again. And the third stage, when a person carries on learning, the third stage they come to is that they learn and they come to realize that in reality they know nothing. In reality they know nothing. Even though they may be the greatest scholar of that time, the most knowledgeable person, the most knowledgeable in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, they realize that they don't know nothing. وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. As Allah says, you have not been given of knowledge except very little. And that's why you have these great companions, Ibn Abbas, Ibn Mas'ud and others. They would say, even though they were such great scholars themselves, such great companions, that if I heard that a person somewhere upon the earth, in the world somewhere, one person knew a hadith that I did not know, I would travel to them. I would travel to them just to learn this single hadith. And this shows that their knowledge has given them piety and humility. Because you could easily say it's one hadith. Just say you have every other hadith ever known and only one is missing, but that one is in China. Okay, forget it, leave it. That's just one hadith. You have everything else. But no, the piety and the humility and the humbleness of a scholar makes them go and take that one single hadith, even if they have to go to a place like China. And this is what we see from the scholars of Islam. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah would travel from Baghdad and he would go towards Yemen and he would stop in the middle in Mecca to make Umrah. And the scholars of Yemen would be there in Mecca making Umrah. So his family and his companions, his friends would say, why go all the way to Yemen? Why not just study with them here in Mecca and then we can go home? It cuts the trip in half. We don't have to go to Yemen. And he would say no. They came here to do Umrah, to worship Allah, not to teach. And I don't want to sit with them when they're not in that frame of mind of teaching. I'll wait for them to go back and I will go and study where they have their books, where they have their knowledge, when they're in that mode of teaching. And then I will go and I will seek knowledge from them. And this was the way that our scholars were, rahimahumullah. And you can only do this. You can only reach that level when you have sincerity. When your intention is purely and sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and no one else. Everything you do is only for the sake of Allah. Every word that you read, every statement that you hear, every single piece and trace of knowledge that you seek, that you learn, is only for the sake of Allah. For Allah and Allah alone. And this is something which we saw from amongst our scholars, rahimahumullah. It's reported that Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, and for those of you that know the history of Saudi Arabia hasn't been around very long. Only 60, 70 years or 50 years or so. Not very long. And the universities that they have now are not very old institutions. So the university in Riyadh, the famous one, Jami'atul Imam, the University of Imam Muhammad ibn Saud, the Islamic University, that university originally was an institute. And before that it was a school. It started off very small and then it developed And as it developed over time, it became bigger and bigger, it became an institution, and then it became a proper university. So when the institution became a university, Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah was a teacher there at that time. And one of the things that happens in a university is that the professors, the lecturers at that university are also asked to do research, right? Just as in universities here. Your lecturers, your professors, doctors at university, they have to also do research. They can't just teach, they have to do research. And based upon their level of research, how much they do, that will depend upon what level they have in the university. That's how they get a promotion. The more they research, the more they're known, then they become a professor and so on. And so Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen was well known for not doing any research. He was a great scholar, but he wouldn't do research for the university. And so once he was asked by one of the administrators or one of the deans of the university, you know that you won't get promoted until you do research. This is now the new system that the university has. This is the way that universities work. So why don't you just put something forth, just write something down and give it to us so that we can print it or publish it so that you can get promoted. And so Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen said no. Knowledge is only sought and taught for the sake of Allah. It's not taught, nor is it sought, nor is it given simply to attain a promotion or to help someone or the university achieve a higher status. And when people begin to do this, then they will not be doing it for the sake of Allah. And so he refused to do it. Based upon this, not because he wasn't able, not because he couldn't make the time, but because he didn't see it as a sincere venture. He saw it as doing something just for the sake of doing something, not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so he refused to do it. And this was something that we saw from amongst the scholars of Islam, rahimahumullah. When it comes to sincerity, there wouldn't be anything more important to them than this. One of my teachers in Medina, one of the great scholars of Medina, Shaykh Muhammad Mukhtar al-Shanqiti, may Allah Azza wa Jal protect him. His father was also a great scholar of Medina, a great scholar of hadith, rahimahullah. And our Shaykh, he would say that the one thing that I benefited more from him than anything else was ikhlas, sincerity. Because the amount of times that he would repeat this and encourage me to remember and remind me of this single one thing was so much that it stuck with me. All he would ever speak about was ikhlas, making things sincere for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Because even when you come and you just do one small thing, but there is sincerity within it, then Allah Azza wa Jal will give it so much blessing and barakah. Whereas if you have thousands and thousands of things that you do, and none of them have ikhlas, then none of them will have any benefit. And that's why it's reported that Imam Malik rahimahullah, when he first wrote his famous book of hadith, al-Muwatta, the famous book of hadith, Muwatta, and he became famous, and it was spread amongst the people, and people took it to other parts of the world. It became a famous book. So many other people at that time began to write the Muwatta, their own version of this book Muwatta, other books of hadith called Muwatta. And so someone once said to Imam Malik, "Oh Imam Malik, you had a Muwatta, now everyone has a Muwatta. And now there's so many, no one will know which one to go to." So Imam Malik rahimahullah said, "Whosoever wrote it for the sake of Allah, it will remain. And whosoever wrote it for other than that, it will disappear." And subhanAllah, when you look today, how many Muwattas do we have? Is there a Muwatta that you know of other than the Muwatta of Imam Malik rahimahullah? And this was over 1200 years ago. So when a person has sincerity, Allah Azza wa Jal blesses their fruits and their work and what they do. And Allah Azza wa Jal gives them the knowledge that they seek. One of the other things that you benefit from this in this statement of the Shaykh, that knowledge is worship, is that knowledge not only in itself is a form of worship, but it also leads to worship. So the more that a person learns, the more worship that they do, the more that they come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you find that the scholars aren't the ones that when they seek more and more knowledge, they do less and less. But rather they are the ones who when they seek more and more knowledge, they do more and more. And this also can be a trap of shaitan. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jalla that He protects and preserves us from it. Many of us fall into this. You'll find that if you go to some people that don't know anything, they haven't studied, they're juhal, they're ignorant, they don't know anything, but they just been taught what they were taught from their parents, taught the basics of the religion when they grew up, how to pray and so on. You'll find that, for example, those people like that will never ever leave their sunnahs. the sunnah before and after the obligatory prayers. For Fajr and Dhuhr and Maghrib and Isha, they will never leave it. For them, in their mind, because of their lack of knowledge, it's like wajib. You must do it. Others will never leave witr prayer. Never ever leave it. Doesn't matter what the situation is, doesn't matter how busy they are, doesn't matter what else is going on in their lives, they will never leave it. Yes, because they don't know, but also because this is the way that it was ingrained in them. Whereas at the same time, you will have students of knowledge that have learnt that it is only a sunnah, it is only a recommended act. There is no sin if you leave it. They rarely pray those sunnah prayers. And look at how shaitan plays with the person. Firstly, when their sincerity isn't there. And secondly, when they don't continue to take this knowledge into the next step of action and worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I remember once I was in a lecture of Shaykh Shanqiti's, Hafidhahullah, and one of the questions he was asked, and for those of you that have been to the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, Masjid Nabawi is very big, and they have chairs for the scholars dotted around. And Shaykh Shanqiti's chair is at the back on the left side of the haram when you're facing the Qibla, at the back. And so what many of the students would do was that they would come and they would pray by the chair instead of praying in the front row. Because they want to be there, like when the Shaykh comes, they want to be right next to the Shaykh, sit next to the Shaykh, benefit from him. So they wouldn't go and they wouldn't pray in the front row. Because it would take time to go through all of the people to come back to the chair, would take time and someone else would have taken their space. And so the Shaykh rahimahullah, he would say, hafidhahullah, when he was asked this question, he said that I am free in the sight of Allah from anyone that does this. Anyone who leaves the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam simply to come and sit with me, that person hasn't sought knowledge. They don't have the etiquettes of knowledge. Because knowledge should make you learn that to get the front row is far more better. Okay, if you come late and perhaps you're not sitting right next to directly in front of the Shaykh, you can still benefit, you can still listen, you can still hear. You won't miss anything. And if you come straight after the prayer, you try to come as quickly as possible, maybe you'll get a closer space. But to leave the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ simply to stay next to the Shaykh or the chair of the Shaykh, this isn't from the etiquettes of a student of knowledge. But the point is here, how shaitan plays with us. Even when we think we're doing something good, shaitan will come and he'll twist it and he'll make it into an act instead of something which instead of it becoming something which brings us closer to Allah, we move further and further away. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal that He keeps us firm. And that's why it's reported that people like Shaykh bin Baz rahimahullah and Shaykh ibn Attained and many others, never would they miss Salatul Layl, the night prayer. Never would they miss their adhkar in the morning and the evening. Doesn't matter what the situation is, doesn't matter where they are, they would pray. And I was reading a biography of Shaykh ibn Baz written by one of his secretaries who stayed with him for 40 years. He was with him for like a lifetime, 40 years. He says, I don't remember a single time that the Shaykh ever missed his night prayer. Whether he was traveling or whether he was resident, whether he was well or whether he was ill, he would always pray. And the vast majority of times he would always pray 11 rak'ahs. Every single night. And the Shaykh sometimes wouldn't sleep until 1 o'clock because of so many guests and so many things that he had to do. He'd sleep at 1 and Fajr would be at 5. But even then he would still wake up. He would never ever miss this. And he says that he would never miss his adhkar. He would pray Fajr in the Masjid, he would sit there and he would make his daily adhkar. He wouldn't allow anything to come in the way of his acts of worship. The Shaykh's busy, he's the mufti of a whole country, he has thousands of things to do, so many visitors, so many people want to see him, so many lectures to give, so many things. But yet he wouldn't compromise on his own ibadah, on his own connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is something which we really need to benefit from when we seek knowledge. The second thing which the Shaykh mentions, Bakr Abu Zayd rahimahullah, when it comes to the etiquettes of a student with himself, is that you must take the path of the Salaf, of the righteous predecessors, meaning that you follow them and you follow this path in all of your affairs, meaning that you follow the book of Allah and the sunnah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you follow the way of the scholars, the methodology of the scholars. And the methodology of the scholars isn't simply about what you study and about learning the way that they prayed or about learning their narrations of hadith, but it is also learning their etiquettes, the way that they were, how they differed, and what would they do if they differed, and how would they seek knowledge, and how would they interact with the scholars and with the rulers and with the general Muslims and with their own students and with their families and with children and with the young and the old. All of this is part of the way of the Salaf. It's not just simply the knowledge that you take, but it's the etiquettes that you take with it. And that's why one of the most amazing things that you learn from when you go and sit with the scholars is you learn from their etiquette. You learn from their character. This is what you benefit from more than you benefit from anything else. And that's why Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah said that one of the things that I benefited from Imam Malik rahimahullah, and he was one of his teachers, he said I benefited from his etiquette. Just the way that he was. Just the way that he sat down, the way that he walked, the way that he spoke, the way that he dealt with people. All of this is from the etiquettes and what we need to learn as students of knowledge. The third and fourth point that he mentions as being from the etiquettes of a student of knowledge with themselves is that you constantly have taqwa. Fear of Allah Azza wa Jal. And point number 4 is that you're constantly aware and conscious that Allah Azza wa Jal is watching you. Muraqabatullah, that Allah knows what you do. He hears and He sees and He knows everything that you do. And when a person is like this is the way that they seek knowledge. They have fear of Allah and they know that Allah is watching them, then Allah Azza wa Jal will give them barakah. Allah Azza wa Jal will give them benefit. And that's why when a person seeks knowledge with this way, they have ikhlas, they have taqwa, they know that Allah is watching them, they do it to seek knowledge sincerely. And they do it to benefit themselves and others. And they don't fall into this trap, another of the traps of shaitan, where they simply seek knowledge so that they can argue with people, or simply seek knowledge so that they can prove others wrong, or simply seek knowledge so that they become famous and people look up to them, and people speak about them, and people call them nice things, and people praise them. And this is from the traps of shaitan. As the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man talab al-ilm liyujadila bihi al-ulama aw yumariya bihi as-sufaha falyatabawwa maq'adahu min an-nar." Whosoever seeks knowledge so that he can argue with the scholars, or so that he can put down and humiliate the foolish, speak with them and mess with them, then let him take his place in the fire. And another narration of this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Whosoever seeks knowledge so that the faces of the people will be directed towards him, then let him take his place in the fire." And so when we seek knowledge with khashya, with muraqabah, not only is it that we will seek beneficial knowledge, but the way that we act, the way that we interact with our knowledge and with those around us will also become exemplary. Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah, when he would go to work in the university, when he would be a teacher, in those days they would have ink pens. And he would use his ink pen, his own ink pen, but he would use the ink of the university. But when he would finish, he would empty the ink out of his pen. Because he would say, when I go home, it's no longer the university's work that I'm doing. And I don't want to misuse their property. When I go home, I'll use my own ink. And he wouldn't do anything else. Shaykh Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad, Hafidhahullah, one of the great scholars of Medina, for a very long period of time, he was the principal of the university, the chancellor of the Islamic University of Medina, for a long period of time. Shaykh Hamad al-Ansari rahimahullah, one of the great scholars, he says that I have never come a single day to the university except that the Shaykh was there before me. Never came a single day except that he was there before me. And he would often leave after everyone else. And I once came to visit him after Dhuhr, after everyone had gone, and I came and I sat with him. And he said to me, "Let me go and make you some tea." So I said to the Shaykh, Shaykh Ahmad Muhsin Abbad, I said to him, "Why don't you ask one of the workers to make it?" He said, "They've all gone home." So I said to him, "Why don't you tell them to stay until you finish and then they can go home when you go home?" He said, "No, their time is up, right? They're contracted to do certain hours. Their time is up and they can go. They're free to go and I won't hold them back and I will go and make tea for you." Shaykh Hamad al-Ansari says, once I went to the Jamia one day in the morning and I thought to myself, to the university, I thought to myself, today no one will be there before me, not even Shaykh Masjid Abbad. I will go so early that there won't be a single person. So he says, I prayed Fajr, I went home, I quickly had breakfast, I got ready and I went straight away. And I found that he was there opening the gates. Even on that day that he thought that he'd be there before him, he was already there and he was opening his gates, meaning he just got there before him. And this was the way that he was. And Shaykh Muhsin Abbad, when people would come and they would ask him to write a personal letter for them, he would say, "Give me a pen and give me some paper." They'd be like, "This is your office, you have paper, you have pens, it's an office. Use one of them." He'd be like, "No, this is a personal letter for you, not for the university. So if you have paper and pen, I'll write it, otherwise go and get some." This is the type of muraqabah, the type of fear of Allah, the type of consciousness of Allah, that you know that Allah is watching you. Know that He hears you, that He sees you. This is the way that you interact with knowledge. And this is the way, the fruits that knowledge gives you. When you have sincerity and you fear Allah, this is the level that you go to. And this is the ihsan that the Prophet ﷺ spoke about, that you worship Allah as if you see Him. And if He doesn't see you, if you don't see Him, then know that He sees you. This is the type of ihsan that these scholars had. May Allah Azza wa Jal preserve them, those that are living, and may have mercy upon those that have passed away. This is the way that they were. This is the way that the scholars were. The fifth characteristic and etiquette that he mentions, rahimahullah, is at-tawadu', humility and humbleness. And this is something that we touched upon before. Humility and humbleness. The more that a person learns, especially after they pass over that first stage of arrogance, the more humble they become. The more humble they become, not only in the sight of Allah, and that means in private, when they're at home alone, they're humble and they display this humility, but also with the people. They have humbleness and they don't like to be praised. Shaykh ibn Baz rahimahullah was once attending a lecture, and the MC, the chairman, he began by giving a long introduction about the Shaykh, praising him and so on. And the Shaykh deserved to be praised. He was a great scholar of Islam. So after the lecture finished, one of the students of the Shaykh came to the chairman and he said, the chairperson, he said to him that the Shaykh doesn't like that people should praise him in front of his face. So Shaykh bin Baz overheard him and he said, and I don't like that people should praise me behind my back as well. It's not just simply about praising me when I'm there. I don't like people praising me at all. Shaykh ibn Attained rahimahullah, he was once giving a lecture. He once went to a radio station to give a lecture. And so what the man did, what the presenter did before the lecture began, he went through a long biography of Shaykh ibn Attained. And Shaykh ibn Attained was very well known to hate people praising him at all. He couldn't stand it, and he would cut people off, and he would even sometimes just tell them to leave if they praised him. And so after he finished his introduction, the Shaykh told them to stop filming, stop recording, stop everything. And he told them to go and delete the whole thing, everything that the man had just said. And then he said, I want you to start again, and all I want you to say is that my name is Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen. That's all I want you to say, and then you can carry on. And I was listening, and a lot of this stuff is on YouTube. This isn't stuff that I'm mentioning to you. You can find a lot of this stuff on YouTube, if you know Arabic, there is. So on YouTube you'll find, for example, that the Shaykh was once sitting in a lecture, and this is mentioned also in the biography of the Shaykh rahimahullah. He was sitting in a lecture, and one of his students wanted to recite some poetry about him. So the Shaykh didn't know what the poetry was about. He said, I want to recite some poetry to you. So the Shaykh said, okay, come and recite. So he began to recite poetry about helping the Quran and the Sunnah, and about defending the Quran and the Sunnah, and about helping Islam and the Muslims and so on. And then within the poetry, halfway through, he began to mention the Shaykh's name, meaning he's the one that does all of this. So when he mentioned the Shaykh's name, the Shaykh said, no, don't mention my name. Change that verse of poetry to something else. So the man agreed and he changed it. But then he carried on, the Shaykh's name kept coming up because the whole poem is about him. So he came up again. Shaykh said no. And then when he realized that the poetry was about him, he said to him, I don't want you to finish. And you can hear on the YouTube clip that the student is saying over and over again, please let me finish, I just want to read it. I'm just going to read it. And he's saying no. And then he says to the students, the people there, he says that the reason I don't want him to do this is because when we praise ourselves, then people become attached to personalities. And they don't become attached to knowledge, to the Quran and the Sunnah. And then when that scholar dies, people think knowledge has finished, because they're attached to one person and not the knowledge itself. And what we need to train ourselves to do is attach ourselves to knowledge, not to the people. Even though we respect them, we love them, we follow them, we study from them, but our attachment isn't specifically to individuals. But rather those individuals, we only attach ourselves to them because of the knowledge that they possess, because of what Allah Azza wa Jal has blessed them with in terms of knowledge. And this is what he wanted to teach his students, rahimahullah ta'ala. And he mentioned the famous statement of Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, "Man kana mustannan falyastanna biman qad mat, fa inna al-hayla yu'man alayhi al-fitna." Whosoever wants to follow someone, let him follow those that have passed away. As for the living, then you don't know what type of fitna will come upon them. You don't know that today someone is righteous, but tomorrow Allah Azza wa Jal may misguide them. Today someone is a knowledgeable person, but tomorrow Allah makes them ignorant. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal that He keeps us firm. And so this is the type of humility and humbleness that I'm talking about. But it's not just praise, it's also in the way that you deal with others. Shaykh bin Baz rahimahullah was known for his humbleness. He would sit and he wouldn't have a meal in his day except that the poor people were allowed to come and sit with him. The poor would be allowed to come into his house and he would sit. And no one would come except that he would ask them to sit for lunch and dinner. And it's famously, like one of his friends, he says that even when we were young children, we were just children, the Shaykh was well known for this. If just a person came to give him salams on the road, he would say to him, you have to come to my house to eat with me. Simply someone on the road just gives him salams, he would say, come to my house and have lunch or dinner with me. This was the way that he was. This was the etiquette that he possessed. And even when he became a great scholar, he would allow them in. And he would become angry. He would become angry if his secretaries or the people around him would take people out, shut them out. He would say, let them come. It doesn't matter. And his house was small. It wouldn't matter how many people were there, but he would let them come. His secretary once mentions that he had a dinner that he had arranged for Yasser Arafat, the former Palestinian leader. He was in Saudi Arabia, and so he came to visit the Shaykh in his house, and the Shaykh was going to give him lunch or dinner. But the Shaykh, from his ways, the way that he was that he wouldn't say no to anyone. So even though this was supposed to be a special dinner for him, he didn't say to his secretary, today keep everyone else out. So everyone that wanted to visit the Shaykh was welcome. And there all the poor and the needy of Riyadh, those people that were there, they were welcome. So when they came into the house, the Shaykh was greeting all of his guests, the poor, the needy, all of those people that came to visit him. And then afterwards, Yasser Arafat came with all of his people, his ministers and so on, his deputies, all of them came. And so what the secretaries did was that they said to the poor people, those people that were there, you sit at the other side. The Shaykh's going to sit at the head and let Yasser Arafat, all of his people sit here. You guys sit at the end. They knew they couldn't kick him out because the Shaykh would become angry, so he told them to sit at the end. So the secretary, he's narrating the story and he says that before we began to eat, and he's saying that this was the custom of the Shaykh, because the Shaykh was blind, right? As you probably know, he couldn't see who was there and who wasn't. So before he would begin to eat, he would begin to call out people's names. Is so-and-so here? Is so-and-so here? Just to make sure that people haven't left or they haven't been kicked out. So he would remember the names of the people that he met just a few minutes ago. So he said, is so-and-so here? One of the poor people. They said, yes. Where is he? He's at the end. No, why is he at the end? Come here. And he made him sit next to him, between him and Yasser Arafat. Where's the next one? Tell him to come here and sit between these two. And he brought them all within the top of the table. He made them all sit next to him. And look at this beautiful humbleness and humility. Look at the way that the scholars were. It wouldn't bother them who was there, who wasn't there. And that's why Allah Azza wa Jal not only gave them this knowledge, but He gave them qabool. Allah accepted them and He loved them. People loved them and they accepted them. And that's why his secretary, Shaykh bin Baz's secretary, would often say that he would have businessmen, really rich businessmen, millionaires, that would come just to give him a letter. And these people in their own world, wherever they are, in their own fields, they're well known. And people are afraid and they have like a certain status in their society. But when they would come to the house of the Shaykh, they wouldn't be able to go and give him salams. They would go to the secretary and say, you go and give the letter on our behalf. Just simply because of the way, the aura that they had. The way that Allah Azza wa Jal gave them this thing that the people in front of them would automatically humble themselves in front of them. And this is something which Allah Azza wa Jal gives to His awliya. And it was known that the Shaykh wouldn't like that he should be, Shaykh bin Baz rahimahullah, he wouldn't like that he should be singled out with something special when other people were there. So if, for example, he went to hospital and he was admitted in, and he was the mufti of Saudi Arabia. So the staff would give him nice food, they would give him the best that they could get. They would order stuff out from him. And so when he would get the food, he would say, what does everyone else eat? He was blind, he couldn't see. Does everyone else have this? And they would say no. He would say, take it away. I want to eat what you give everyone else. If you went to a mosque and the mosque had carpet, but when he came to the imam's position, they put out a special prayer mat for him, he would throw it away. He wouldn't allow it. And he would say, I'm going to have what everyone else has. And so the humbleness and the humility that they had. And these are people who, had they wanted, they could have become very extremely rich. Had they wanted, they could have had much power. And they could have done what they wanted. And I remember that I was listening to Shaykh Abdullah ibn Aqil rahimahullah, one of the scholars that passed away just a few weeks ago. And he was saying that one of his teachers was Shaykh Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Shaykh rahimahullah, one of the great scholars of Saudi Arabia, and he was also a teacher of Shaykh bin Baz. And he would say that I would go to Shaykh Muhammad ibn Ibrahim, and he was the mufti of his time, and he would have just come back from the king, having spoken to the king, had issues with dealings with the princes and so on. But he goes, never once did I ever hear him boast about his sittings. He never used to come back and say to his students or the people that he worked with, I was just with the king. I was just with Prince so-and-so. I was just with such and such a leader or such and such an ambassador. I was just having dinner with them or chilling with them or doing whatever I was doing with them. Never would you know that he was someone that sat with those types of people because of the humility that they possessed, rahimahumullahu ta'ala. The sixth thing that the Shaykh mentions from the etiquettes of a student with himself is az-zuhud, to abstain from the dunya, to abstain from this world. And Shaykh Bakr Abu Zayd rahimahullah himself mentions within his book that his Shaykh Muhammad al-Amin al-Shanqiti, he noticed one day that the Shaykh was unable to differentiate between currency. This was a man in his 50s, 60s, an old man, and he had money, but he wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a 5 and a 10, a 20 and a 50. He couldn't tell the difference. And so he said to him, Shaykh Bakr Abu Zayd said to him, Ya Shaykh, and he was an intelligent man. The man was known to be a poet. He was known for his exceptional intellect. He was an usuli. He was someone who was well known for the different sciences of Islam, and they're very difficult sciences. And so he would say to me, you're such an intelligent man, but you can't differentiate between the two. And so the Shaykh would reply and he would say, by Allah, had I wanted to become a rich man or a powerful man, I would have known how to do so. But this stuff, it doesn't interest me. I don't bother myself with this stuff. And so he would literally take out a wad of cash and he would say to the person with him, pay, if it's £10, which one's the 10? And they would have to say, Shaykh, this is the 10. And then he would go and he would give it. This is the way that he was. Abstinence from the dunya. And it's reported from our Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen and Shaykh bin Baz and others that so many times the princes and businessmen would come and say, let us build you a new house. Let us get you a new house. And they would never say no. And it's reported that Shaykh bin Baz, his secretary, says that his children would always say to him, we need a bigger house. You have so many guests, we need a bigger house. And he would say, no, there is more barakah in this house. Allah has blessed this house, I want to stay here. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen was once given a new car from one of the princes. And so the Shaykh was given the car, but he didn't want the car, but because it was a gift, he couldn't say no. So he took the car. And then after a short while, someone came, one of his students, and he invited him to his wedding. The Shaykh said, I can't come to your wedding, I'm too busy, I'm already preoccupied, I have another appointment, but here's your gift. And he gave him the car. That's for you, take it. This was the way that they were with the dunya. Abstinence from the dunya. It's reported that Shaykh bin Baz, often when people came to him, he would never say no. If someone was in debt, someone needed money, someone needed help, he would never say no. He might only give them a little bit, but he would give them something. He wouldn't say no. And so once someone came and they wanted to do a project, a da'wah project, and he asked the Shaykh for 3.7 million riyals. 3.7 million. And the secretary says that at the time the Shaykh was in debt. He'd given so much away, he was in debt. And so the man came with 3.7 million. Everyone there is thinking the Shaykh's going to say, excused himself, say, sorry, I can't help you. The Shaykh said, okay, I'll get the money for you. And so his secretary said, you know you're already in debt. How can you afford to give someone 3.7 million? You don't even have a pound to your name, a riyal to your name. And so he said, instead go and write a letter to one of the princes, ask him to help. And so he wrote a letter to the prince, and the prince gave the money. And then he said to his students, he said to his secretary, didn't I say to you that Allah would help us? Allah would make it easy for us. This was the way that they were. Zuhud in the dunya. And that's why you have everyone knows that famous narration of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, who even though he was one of the richest people, one of the most affluent people, when he died he had nothing to his name. Everything he had spent for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is zuhud in the dunya, abstinence from the dunya. The seventh thing that the Shaykh Bakr Abu Zayd rahimahullah mentions from the etiquettes of a person within themselves is husnul khuluq, having good character. And even though we're speaking about etiquettes generally, this is about good character and the way that a person should be within themselves and within their good character. Point number 8, he mentions is that a person should be good with their time, have good time management, should have good control of their time. And there are many stories on this. And I'm actually going to start summarizing now because I have a lot to get through. But Shaykh ibn Attained and Shaykh bin Baz were known for their time management. Shaykh bin Baz wouldn't even waste time when he was driving from point A to point B. He would make people read to him, or he would ask questions. Even in his final illness, when he was about to die, when he was dying, the Shaykh rahimahullah, when people would come and visit, his secretaries would come and they would visit him in the hospital, he would say to them, why haven't you brought your papers with you? Read them to me. And he'd become angry. He'd say, why are you wasting my time? Go and bring them and let us read. Let me find out what people want. And even on the day before that he passed away, he was writing letters to people, answering questions, doing things that needed to be done. He wouldn't waste any of his time. He spent all of his time for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even when he was sitting and eating, if the phone rang, he would go and he would answer the phone. Answer a question, give a fatwa, whatever was needed. He wouldn't waste his time in any way, shape or form. And this was well known about the Shaykh. The Shaykh rahimahullah, even in his final illness, the one that he died in, he heard about the janazah, someone had passed away, one of his old friends, a very old man that was a friend. And on the same day, a Shaykh from one of the Shaykhs of Saudi Arabia had already also passed away. Two people passed away in the same day. Both of their family came to ask the Shaykh to lead the janazah. And the Shaykh is in his final illness. He can't even walk. So the Shaykh said yes to both of them. One was after Dhuhr, one was after Asr. And his secretary says that we were walking with him and he would fall down. Literally he would collapse. So we'd pick him up and he'd walk and he'd vomit. And then he'd walk. And he went and he led one janazah. Then he went to the family's house. He sat with them. He consoled them. Then he went to the other janazah. He led. He gave the family condolences. And then he came back. Even though he was in this way. And look at the beautiful character. The effect that has upon someone. And I heard from one of his students a beautiful story about Shaykh bin Baz and his character. And that was once that the Shaykh was in his house. And this was a long time ago in Riyadh. And he was praying. He was praying Salatul Layl, the night prayer. And he heard someone jump on top of the roof. A thief. He heard someone jump on top of the roof. So he finished his prayer. The Shaykh is blind, he can't see. He woke up his son and he said, I can hear someone on the roof, go and see who it is. So they found someone trying to break in the house. And it happened to be a Pakistani man. Right? That's the way the story goes, right? I ain't making that up. He happened to be a Pakistani man. So they brought him down into the house. And the son said, let me go and call the police. The Shaykh said, no. Go and call the cook instead. My cook, the person that cooks for me. He's like, why do you want the cook for at this time of the night? He said, I want him to make food for this man. His son was like, why do you want him to make food? He said, I don't think he came to my house except that he's hungry. Go and make some food. And so he went and he woke up the cook, he made some food, they gave him some food. And this is a thief, right? He's trying to steal from the Shaykh. And he doesn't know who the Shaykh is and what the Shaykh is. He's just a random house, happens to be the house of the Shaykh. And so he's there and he's giving him food. And then he starts asking him about his story. Why are you stealing? What do you want? And so he's telling him that my father is very ill in Pakistan. He needs an operation and it's going to cost him so many thousands. And we don't have the money. And the only thing I can think of is to steal. And so I came to steal some money. And so the Shaykh said to the son, go and write him that check that he needs. All of the money that he needs, go. From his personal account, go and give him all of the money that he needs. And he didn't take him to the police, even though the man would have had his hand chopped off. He didn't take him to the police, he didn't go and give him over. Rather, he said, go and help him. And then right of the story, his secretary says that man, that Pakistani man, he became a student of the Shaykh. He became one of his students and he spent most of his life studying with the Shaykh. And when the Shaykh died, he was one of the people that was most affected by his death. He cried so much at the death of the Shaykh. Look at this beautiful character and how knowledge gives a person this standing in the community, that he knows how to deal with people. He knows how to change this person who was a thief into a righteous person, a student of knowledge. Someone who instead of stealing, he goes and he learns about the religion of Islam. And this also brings us to the ninth and final point in this section, and that is ar-rifq, gentleness, kindness, the way that a person should be. And this is something which we really, even outside of studying and seeking knowledge, it's something which we need. To be gentle with our brothers and our sisters, to be kind towards them. The Prophet ﷺ ordered this with his companions, even those that were sinful. even those that committed and repeatedly performed sins. And I mentioned in my lecture yesterday that the famous narration of the Prophet ﷺ, where that companion who constantly drank alcohol and he would constantly be flogged. And so one of the companions commented and he said, this person keeps coming back to be flogged. And so the Prophet ﷺ was upset at this word and he said, do not help shaitan overpower your brother. So when someone's making a mistake, when our fellow brothers and sisters are in need of advice, we don't stamp on them, trample on them, kick them when they're down, but rather we help them, we're gentle with them, we're kind towards them, we help them come back to the straight path. And this is the way that the scholars were. This was the way that the scholars were. And Shaykh bin Baz had this beautiful etiquette from his knowledge and from the way that he dealt with people, with his guests, with everything. He had this way. And that's why the most praise that I've heard from all of the scholars is concerning Shaykh bin Baz. Everyone that you meet was amazed by this individual. They were just amazed by him, amazed by his character. And I don't think that he was necessarily the most knowledgeable scholar in hadith or fiqh. He wasn't necessarily the most knowledgeable. But his character and his conduct and his dealings and the taqwa that he had, the piety that he had, that's what made him such a great individual. And that's why you have great scholars saying that we never saw anyone like him. Never saw anyone like him. Just the way that he dealt with himself, just the way that he was, just the way that he met with people, the way he sat with them, what he did, what he didn't do. This was what had the most effect on people. The second section, inshallah, we'll conclude with this today, is the section that the Shaykh Bakr Abu Zayd rahimahullah, he mentions about how to seek knowledge. And I'm not really going to spend too much time on this, but basically he says, in general broad terms, that what a person should do is learn the basics before they learn the different branches. So before you go and learn about everything and anything, learn about the basics. Learn about your aqeedah, your belief. Learn about how to pray, how to give zakah, how to fast, how to perform hajj. And that's one of the things that most amazed me from the majority of scholars is that when they would come and they would teach, and these are scholars, right? You think that they would teach the hardest book because they're able to teach the hardest book. They would teach something which no one else can teach because they're of that level and most people aren't. But no, they would start with the smallest, easiest books. And what they wanted to do was really teach people that this is what you need to do. You need to learn knowledge and seek it in a drip, drop fashion. Take it a piece at a time. And that's why it's famously reported that the scholar says, Man rama al-ilma jumla, dhahaba anhu jumla. Whoever takes knowledge in a great gulp, he will lose it in a great gulp. Whoever takes all of knowledge at once, he will lose it all at once. Rather, you would find them taking so much time. And I remember that our Shaykh Shanqiti, hafidhahullah, he spent 8 years teaching Umdatul Ahkam. Umdatul Ahkam is one of the smallest hadith books that you can find. It's literally very, very small. Only 400 or 500 hadith within that book. He spent 8 years teaching this book. And often he would get questions and comments on paper saying, why can't you teach more? Why don't you do more? And he would just literally do one hadith a week. He wouldn't do any more than that. Just one hadith a week, but he would go through all of the benefits. He would go through it in a lot of detail. But people want to finish, right? They want to finish. They want to go into the next one. They want to be on Bukhari tomorrow. He's still on Umdat al-Ahkam for 8 years. And so he would say, when he was asked these questions, he would say, because I want you to teach you something. And that is that knowledge is taken in this way. All of the benefits that I give you in terms of the hadith, in terms of the narrate of the hadith, the biography of the companions, the different benefits that you get, as well as the fiqh. And his lesson was a fiqh lesson, as well as the rulings, the halal and the haram. All of this, if you were to take all of it together, you would seek much knowledge. But what people want to do is they just want to be hasty. They just want to finish, move on, so they can say that I studied so much, that I did so much, that I finished so much. And this is what they want to do. Shaykh Bakr Abu Zayd rahimahullah, he mentions a way in which to seek knowledge. Whatever science you're seeking, he says there are 5 steps. Number 1 is that you memorize a short text within that science. Number 2, that you read that text to a shaykh and that you learn from him and you study it with him. So he goes through it with you and he explains what it is. Number 3, that you don't go to the large volumes, the large books until you do the first 2 steps. So instead of going to al-Mughni or to Majmu' al-Fatawa of Shaykh al-Islam or to the very big books of any science, start with the small ones. Go through Arba'in al-Nawawi, the 40 hadith of Imam al-Nawawi, Umdatul Ahkam, Bulugh al-Maram. Go through these books, and once you know them properly, then move on to Bukhari and Muslim and so on. So this is point number 3. Point number 4 is that you shouldn't jump from one science to the next, or from one book to the next. So today you study Umtitled Ahkam, you get bored after 10 hadith. So you go to Bulugh al-Maram, you study 20, you get bored. You go to Bukhari, you read one chapter, you get bored. You go to Muslim, you read a chapter and you get bored. Or you jump from one science to the next. So today you want to do Tawheed, tomorrow you want to do Fiqh, the next day you want to do Hadith, simply because you think it's too slow, or because you're too bored, or because you're too hasty. This is not the way to study knowledge. And the fifth and final point is that whatever you're studying, make sure that you take all of the benefits within that science. So when you're studying Bulugh al-Maram, for example, or Umdatul Ahkam, it's a book of hadith. But the hadith are pertaining to fiqh, acts of worship, how to worship Allah, your fiqh, your dealings, your jurisprudence. And so you take all of the benefits. So when you come across the hadith, it's narrated by Abu Hurairah. Learn about who Abu Hurairah was. Learn about his life. Then look at the different benefits that you get. The benefits in terms of etiquette, the benefits in terms of fiqh, the benefits in terms of hadith, the benefits in terms of your aqeedah, the explanation of a verse of the Quran that might be present within that one hadith. And so you take all of the benefits from that. And if you do that, this is the way that you become a student of knowledge. And then he mentions many other things as well. And what he does is he goes through each science mentioning the order in which books should be taken within that science. So he goes through, for example, Tawheed, and he says, you start with the books of Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, Usul al-Thalatha, Qawaid al-Arba'a, Kashf al-Shubuhat, Kitab al-Tawheed. Then move on to the books of Ibn Taymiyyah, al-Wasitiyya, al-Hamawiyya, al-Tadmuriyya, then al-Tahawiyya, and so on. And so he basically gives you this, and inshallah it's also available in English, so I don't really think that I need to go through that. But what he does mention, the final point in this section, and we conclude in this, is the importance of taking knowledge from scholars. The importance of taking knowledge from scholars and not simply taking knowledge from books. Reading a book is fine, and it's a great way to seek knowledge. And reading Sahih al-Bukhari, there is barakah in this. But if you are only to read and not take from the scholars, then you will learn that there are many mistakes that you make. There are many mistakes that you make. And that's why there's a famous story of someone who once came and he just wanted to seek knowledge themselves, self-study. Just study from books. So he came and he thought what I would do was that I will study one chapter at a time, and I will go and I will implement that chapter. I will act upon it, and then I will move on to the next chapter. So he came to a book and he found in that book chapter that you kill every single dog. The chapter of killing dogs. So he read the chapter, he understood the chapter, so he went out and he found every dog that he could find and began to kill it. Just killing dogs left, right and center. So he came the next day, turned the page over to the next chapter. Chapter heading, the abrogation of the ruling of killing every single dog. So what did he do? He just went and killed loads of dogs for no reason. But the point is that when you study with a scholar, the scholar knows, he's read the books. He studied them from his scholars. He knows, he's studied different sciences. He knows how to integrate them and merge them. So he can teach you in a much more beneficial way, in a much more principled way. And so he takes you from a very basic level and he rises with you, he gives you more knowledge and he makes you advanced. And so this is the benefit of taking knowledge from the scholars, not just that you do it yourself. Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen in his explanation of this point, he says that there are three main benefits of studying with scholars. Number one is that they shorten the path for you. So because they've read, for example, if it's hadith, they've read everything or many things within that science of hadith. So when they come across a hadith, one hadith, they will know that there are other hadith that are similar to it. Other ahadith which apparently contradict it. Other ahadith which complement it. Other ahadith which abrogate it. And so they will bring it all for you. Instead of you having to go and study and do all of that work again. It's like what we say, why reinvent the wheel again? The scholars have already done the hard work, they can bring it for you. Number two, he says, is that it's quicker. So when you go to a teacher, he can give you that knowledge in a much quicker way because he knows how to teach you. He went through the process. He knows what the easiest point is, what the easiest path is from point A to point B. So he helps you. And if you don't know, you have questions, you're confused, you have mistakes, he can correct you. And number three, he says, is that you develop a connection with the Shaykh. So not only is it that you're benefiting from his knowledge, you benefit from his etiquettes, you have this personal connection, and this is the way that the sciences of Islam are taught. They're taught from math, from generation to generation. And that's why in our religion we have something called the ijaza, which is a permission, something that you give to someone to grant them permission to narrate. You have it in Quran, you have it in the books of hadith, and you have it in other books as well. And so all of this will go back to those scholars or to the Prophet ﷺ or to the companions or to the scholars of hadith, so that you know that you've sought this knowledge in a correct way. When you're reading a name, you know that you're reciting it and you're pronouncing it in a correct way, and so on and so forth. And so these are the benefits of studying from the scholars of Islam. And so inshallah, I think we'll conclude from there. And next week, inshallah, we'll carry on with the next section, which is Adab al-Talib ma'a shaykh, the etiquettes that a student should have with his shaykh and with his teacher. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. If there's any questions, we can take them, otherwise we'll just conclude. Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd has many books. I don't know how many have been translated into English though. Other than this one, I'm not sure. Maybe there's someone else that knows probably better than me. But if you Google it, maybe that's the best way. But he has many books in Arabic. How? How do you miss the sunnah prayers without neglecting them? Don't miss them. What do you mean, how do you miss them? No, so the point wasn't that you consider them to be wajib, but the point is that once you learn that even though they're not wajib, you still continue to do them, and that's the real test. That your iman is strong enough that you know that you don't have to do this, and that Allah won't punish you if you leave it. But your strength of iman makes you do it because it will bring you closer to Allah. It's a recommended act. Whoever prays 12 sunnah prayers in a day will have a house built for him in Jannah and so on. You know the benefits of this, and so you do it to come closer to Allah. And that's the point of knowledge, that it brings you closer to Allah, not drives you further away. So some people seek knowledge and then they go to try to teach. How do you know that you're able to teach? If you're teaching just what you learned. So for example, a person, he learned Kitab al-Tawheed. He went through this book, he finished this book. And then you go and you just teach it the way that you learned it. To a group of people that don't have access to anyone else, or a group of people that you take so that you can benefit from teaching them yourselves, inshallah, that's okay. But the way that you would normally know how to teach is that your teachers would tell you. They would give you permission. They would say, yes, you can teach this book. Yes, you can do this. Yes, you can do that. And that's one of the shortest ways of knowing. But if it's something, for example, you learned something, you studied it, you've been to a teacher, he's taught you it, and then you study that in a sufficient depth, and then you go and teach it, inshallah, I think that's okay. And one of the best ways of memorizing and revising knowledge, and we'll come on to this next week, is to teach it. It's one of the things that is mentioned. Allahu A'lam. Okay, so inshallah we'll conclude there. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi.
غرباء